Hey guys, I'm Myra with Atomic Baby Cosplay, and today I'm going to talk about identifying pattern elements from your cosplay concept art. So what do I mean by that? I mean being able to pick apart your concept art and figure out what pattern elements you're going to need to look for when you go to buy a pattern. So I have three different examples I'm going to share with you today. One of them is a 3D animation, one of them is a 2D animation, and one of them is a live action because they all kind of have different things you need to play with. So I'm going to insert the concept art into the video so you guys can see it rather than holding it up and hope that I'm on screen. So the first one I want to talk about is Zelda from Breath of the Wild. So I've chosen to use her white dress for this example because it has some good front and back shots, and I think some of the shapes are easier to identify. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the skirt part of her dress. Now, if you look at it, it has this kind of bubble situation that's happening on the back. It's called draping. That's what's going on the back, and it kind of carries around to the front, and you can see that it has a belt that's kind of securing it on. She also has two underlayers, one that has accordion style pleating on the very bottom layer of the skirt, and then another skirt that's smooth that's underneath that draped skirt. So you could make three different skirts if you wanted to with three different waistbands, or you could make three different layers and attach them to one waistband. Either way, you're looking at making making three layers. It's just whether or not you're making one skirt or three skirts. Or you could attach it to the bodice of the dress. It looks like she has a strapless dress on. So what you could do is attach those three layers of skirts to the bodice strapless dress portion of it. You don't have to because you also have that belt, so you could choose to hide it by doing a strapless top, and then a skirt with a waistband if you didn't want to have the weight of the skirt hanging onto the top, if you're not sure if that would hold up for you. You could also choose to attach invisible clear straps to the top in order to help make sure it stays up throughout your con. So in terms of seam lines, she doesn't really have a whole lot of seam lines that are showing. You can see the accordion pleats, which is indicated by the straight up and down lines on that skirt. That's showing you that it's pleated. You can kind of see that has that texture of pleating, right? But otherwise, there's not really a whole lot of seams other than you can see where the layers are of the fabrics. So that the seam of it is up to you. Now, by looking at the top, you can see that it's really well fitted, which means that it probably has princess seams, which are seams that run along the bust of a dress. That is going to give it more of a fitted and smooth shape since it's unlikely to be made from a stretch material like this dress is, because it's strapless. You wouldn't want to make this type of strapless dress out of a stretch material, so you're likely to use a non-stretch material, which means that it probably has boning and princess seams that you're going to need in your dress. Closure-wise, you actually luck out a little bit because her hair covers the back of the dress, so you don't need to really worry about the closures. Odds are you're going to use a zipper attachment, but you also could choose to use buttons on the waistband of the skirt, and you could choose to do lacing if you wanted like a corset style back. But because her hair covers the back of the dress, you have a lot more flexibility there. If it were me, I would make the whole thing as a dress and I would use an invisible zipper on the back. Fabric-wise, so fabric is a harder one to identify from a still screenshot. You generally want to see movement to identify the fabric because in a still, it is sometimes harder to identify if it's a stiff fabric or a flowing fabric or thin or what have you. In this case, it does look to me like it's got a little bit of thickness to it. It's not a super thin sheer chiffon or anything like that. But I would also say that I don't think it's necessarily a stiff cotton either. It looks to me like it's a satin or like a silky kind of material that I would use for that. Okay, so our next example is a live action example. In this example, you can usually identify seams a little bit easier in live action because you can pause it. In this case, I don't think she actually has any seams on the front. My inclination would be that this has princess seams, but you actually don't see any on the front of her dress. So in that case, I would guess there's a side seam running along the sides underneath her arms. I would say that the material is a stretchier material that's very heavy, which is, it looks like it's velvet to me, so it'd be like that stretch velvet material, and that's what's giving it that natural shape is because they cut it kind of boxy, but if you look, it just grazes her bust and falls down, so it's not actually shaped super tight to her body. It's very flowy. You can also see that there might be two layers happening here. She has those two bands of silver beaded trim up by the neckline, but they're kind of overlapping. So you could choose to do that by doing a thin facing layer underneath it and connect the two, or you could even do an entire slip layer underneath the dress. So it's actually a 2-layer dress. That's up to you and your personal preferences, but there are a couple of options. Now, in this particular image, you can't see the sleeves super well, but from watching the film, we know that they're very long, they're very big, they're very drapey, and they're also very thin. So that would be probably a silk material that was used for that, or something similar. They're not super sheer, but they are very long and drapey and thin and flowy. The dress itself definitely has a weight to it. Live action is a little bit nicer for identifying fabric types because you can see, they don't have to animate it as much, so you can really see the detail there. The beaded detail helps to give it that weight and that like sense of heaviness about it. Closures, again, you kind of luck out because her hair is running down her back, so you could choose to insert a zipper, but from the cut of the dress where it's just barely grazing her shoulders and the fact that it's not clinging to her body super tightly, and I would guess that you probably don't actually need a closure of any kind to keep this dress on. Probably it would be cut large enough that you could probably just slip it right on over your head. Now, real world physics might mean that you do want a closure in order to make that neckline maybe a little bit smaller so that it doesn't fall off your shoulders. You might find that you want it to be fitted more than hers is fitted, in which case you would definitely want to include a zipper. You could also do corset lacing up the back if you wanted to try to keep it a little bit more period, even though it's Lord of the Rings, so it's not necessarily a period piece, but all of their costumes were very medieval. So they wouldn't have had zippers. So I would say if you wanted to stay accurate, do laces, but I actually don't know that you need any form of closure really for this dress. I would say that the way that it looks constructed to me, you wouldn't need a closure, but your mileage may vary, and that's kind of the best part of cosplay is you can interpret it how you want to interpret it, and there is no one right answer. All right, and so for our last example, I chose a 2D animation. This is Lapis Lazuli from Steven Universe. Her dress is really, really simple. It's a lot of block shapes, but I wanted to kind of explain how you can identify seam points in a 2D animation, which has less texture and less design elements than some of the 3D animation generally. In this case, she's made it a little bit easy for us because anywhere that you can see that the color has changed, so in the diamonds on, or the triangles on her bodice and on her skirt, that would be a seam point probably. I would say with her skirt, personally, I would make a circle skirt. There are a ton of tutorials on YouTube and also on Google for how to make a circle skirt to your measurements, but I would make a circle skirt and then make that triangle as an applique that I applied on top and sewed it on top of the circle skirt. You could also choose to do where you cut a spot out of the circle skirt and sew the triangle into that cutout, but I think that that would be more challenging and I don't know that the visual would change significantly. I'm also saying a circle skirt, even though that's a little bit fuller than what this animation looks like based on other costumes that she wears throughout the show. With this particular skirt, it's more of an A-line, so you wouldn't necessarily need the fullness of a circle skirt, but personally, because of the way she looks in the show and the animation, like when you're seeing her moving around, I would lean towards a circle skirt. The top is a relatively simple halter top. You can see the bow just kind of sticking out right at the back, and then she's got the little cutout. In this case, I would not do an applique because it's such a large piece of the bodice. The applique on the skirt is relatively small compared to the size of the whole skirt, but the bodice, it's a pretty big chunk of the whole bodice, so I would probably pattern out just that section to be made out of a different color. And then lastly, she's got those wings, which you can choose how you want to interpret yourself. I've seen some really cool variations where they do transpart warbler that they use for the wings. I've also seen some made out of vinyl, which are sewn. I've seen some made out of vinyl, which are sewn and then filled with water, which is even cooler. There's a whole lot of options that you can do with that, but mostly I want to focus on sewing techniques on this channel. So I hope those examples helped some of you. Basically, at its core, what you're looking to do is identify where the seams are. Usually in animations, those are represented by straight lines. Sometimes you'll see them, like in the case of this book, you can kind of see he has these straight lines which indicate a seam on his jacket. So you want to look for where your seams are so you can kind of see what's going on. If you don't have seams to identify with, you can also look at the overall shape of the garment and decide if is it close fitting, is it loose, is the material something where you think it's going to be stretchy, or is it something where it's not going to be stretchy. You also want to look at your fabric selections based on the movement helps a lot, but even if you're looking at just a still and there's no movement at all, you can still kind of identify fabric by looking at how they've animated it at the bottom. Generally, if there's more squiggly lines at the bottom, it's a fuller skirt or a fuller piece of fabric. Sometimes it's more flowy, generally. And if it's more straight, it's usually a stiffer fabric with less flow and less sheerness. You also want to think about where you're going to put your closures. Animators don't always include where the closures are on a piece. Corset lacing is often included because corseting looks cool, but if you have like a zipper or an invisible zipper, those are not often seen in the show. So you need to think about where you would put your closures so you can get in and out of your costume. And with that, I'm going to be all done, guys. I hope that this was helpful for some of you. I will be back on Thursday with another video. I will see you then. Remember to click subscribe if you want to see more of my videos, and come join us on Facebook and Fellowship of the Seam. I'll have a link in the description down below. That's where we're talking all about conceptualizing in that group, so there's a ton more detail. It's totally free to be there, and I would love to meet you. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye!